Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandi NP. Each episode will bring you a new topic or interview related to brain health and wellness as part of my mission to help you on the path to a healthier, happier brain. So, let's get started. Hey folks, before we get started today, I wanted to take a moment and let you know, if you didn't already, that my new book is available now on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. I wrote this book about the first year of my recovery from my TBI, my traumatic brain injury, from the standpoint of someone who went from being a provider to being a patient. I thought I knew so much about concussion recovery and management until I was on this side of the treatment table. In this book, I talked about some of the barriers that I found, what my symptoms really felt like on a regular basis, and how it affected my whole family, among so many, many other topics. The purpose of this book is to help family members or friends or anybody close with somebody who has had a TBI to understand better what's happening inside the head of someone who actually experienced the TBI. Because to be honest, until you've been there, you really don't quite understand. You think you do, but you really don't. But I shared this information in doing my best to try to help other people understand what it's like to be in the head of somebody who had a TBI and is recovering and struggling with these things on a day-to-day basis. And also, I wrote the book just to help others who have had a TBI to realize that they're not alone. These symptoms affect so many people. As I had some of my friends and colleagues read through the book, I've been told that absolutely, yes, they completely understood what I was saying because they too felt that. Or those that hadn't been through TBI said they felt like they were there through the entire experience with me from day one because I explained it so well in the book. And at the end of the book, I explained how I was able to do this with a TBI because it was not an easy feat. But I'm really, really proud of the product that I produced, and I'm really excited to share this with other people. So the book itself is called Welcome Back, a TBI recovery story from provider to patient. And as I mentioned, it is available on both Amazon and barnesandnoble.com at this time. I am working on setting up some book signings for those of you who are local. So if anyone has a recommendation of where to hold it, I would be open to those recommendations as well. So feel free to leave me a comment on those after the show. I will include the links to both of these in the show notes so that you know where to find the book if you're interested in it. If you know of a library or you are a library or a wholesaler, the book is also available on Ingram Spark, so it is there also. And I am finalizing the recorded version of it for Audible, so that will be coming also, so stay tuned for that one. My goal with this book, folks, is not to become a millionaire. I don't have delusions of grandeur on that one. But my goal is to share what I have learned and what I've experienced with others so that others can either feel heard or can understand their loved one better. So thanks for listening, and I hope you consider getting a copy of the book. Now, let's get on to today's show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. I am your host, Mandi Dickey, Mandi NP, as I call myself too. So today I've got a little bit different show again. It's a solo episode today. I don't have a guest on with me, so you get just me talking for a while. And I think many of you know at this point that I've been working at Hypercharge Clinic. That is the clinic where I started going back in October of last year, 6 months after the accident, to do the things like the red light therapy, the transcranial laser, all the things that they offered there at the clinic. And that is where I really started seeing improvement in my life after my TBI. 6 months of doing PT, OT, all the things, going to all my doctor's appointments, therapy appointments, eye doctor appointments. I hadn't really seen much change until I started doing the red light, also known as photobiomodulation, and transcranial laser, and the PEMF mat, the structured water, the exercise with oxygen therapy that we added months later when I was able to tolerate it. But I've been working there part-time, laser tech as a laser technician, bumping up to clinical specialist here soon. So I'll be doing some consults with new clients as they come in, which is really exciting to add on to my responsibilities on a daily basis. But what many of you might not know is that the CEO of Hypercharge Clinic, Dr. Sinacropi, and I, as the co-host, started up a couple of months ago a radio show here in Minnesota called Recharging the Human Battery. It airs on Saturday mornings on AM 950 radio at 11 a.m. if you want to listen to it as it's on the radio, or you can find it online at the AM 950 radio website. There are some weeks that Dr. Sinacropi's on there by himself. There are some weeks that we're together. And I just recorded my own solo episode for that as well, that actually will be airing when this show comes out. It'll be tomorrow. So that will be exciting as well. So on that show, we talk about a lot of things in medicine that are currently considered like outside the box treatments. So that's where we talk about the photobiomodulation, the transcranial laser, all the other things that typically are not thought of as traditional Western medicine. Some people would call this alternative therapies, but we are calling them complementary treatments because they do work well alongside the traditional medical treatments rather than just, as being alternatives to it. Because I still do my PTOT speech therapy. I still work with my eye doctor. I still work with my neurologist, and I do the photobiomodulation, the transcranial laser, the PEMF, all the things. And then in addition, we've had the neurofeedback conversations on here on the show, and I've done that. And I've tried almost all the things I can think of, adding more tools to my toolbox because as we've talked about here, and as we talk about a lot on the AM 950 show, that we have layers in our toolbox, and we add more tools to the toolbox because every time you layer something else, the treatment that you're doing just gets accentuated. It bumps that up that level. So Tram, one of the co-founders of Hypercharge Clinic, likes to say 1 + 1 is not equal to here. 1 + 1 = 4, +1 = 8. So because every time you add something else, another layer of the treatment, you get compounding effects. So it's not just that one treatment. There is no one size fits all treatment for concussion care. And that's, I think, the difficult thing with this as I've been recovering and trying to find that one thing. There is not that one thing. So those of you out there who are listening who've also had a concussion or a TBI have probably identified the same thing. You've probably looked for that one thing that's going to help fix all your issues, and there is not that one thing. So we add layers to the therapy. We add new treatments on top of other treatments. We add new therapists on top of the therapists that we already have. And by doing so, we build up that village. So that whole statement of it takes a village to raise kids way back in the day, it takes a village to help someone heal from concussion. So there just is no one size fits all thing. Everybody is going to be different. And then there's a bigger topic that will come out in the AM 950 radio show, the Recharging the Human Battery, tomorrow, again, as this episode comes out. When that episode comes out, I went into a lot more detail on like the bigger picture of how this works. But I do want to take a moment to talk about like secondary injuries because I had another injury a few weeks ago. So first off, let me take a moment to kind of explain that a little bit more. While we were on vacation, so I took a week off, right? I gave you guys a week off of listening to me interview people, whether you liked it or not. You got that week off because I was in the Boundary Waters up in northern Minnesota with really, really sketchy phone signal. So I was not going to be able to be posting anything, and I am not in a place where I have staff members that work for me. So it's me posting everything. And I didn't have the ability to do that for that week. So I decided to take a week off and not be on my social media. I kept my phone in my pocket as a camera, but I turned off turned it into airplane mode for the most part because it was looking for a signal, it was looking for internet, it was looking for all the things, and they weren't there. So I just turned it off, and it saved my battery because I think I only had to charge my phone once during the week. But it made a really good camera for taking pictures. I got some really cool pictures that week. But in doing so, while being up there, we had picked up a new camper to go on this trip because my husband can't lay on the ground anymore with camping. So we picked up a camper, and the camper had this really cool awning off the side of it, and which was really helpful because we got rain several of the days that we were up there. So we had the awning up to shelter us going in and out of the camper so we didn't get rain in the camper and all of that. However, when you have a significant head injury like mine, it leaves you with some leftover symptoms. And we are now a year and almost 5 months since the accident, and I still have problems with my visual comprehension, meaning I can look at things and not tell how far away from me they are. I can look at things and not be able to come up with a word for what it is. And I don't perceive where things are in space very well. So that awning hanging out over the side of the camper with the metal arm holding it up, it was there. I saw it, but I didn't register that it was there. And I smacked my head right into the sharp little edge on that arm holding the awning up and doubled over, had to hold myself up. Otherwise, I almost blacked out. So, had another head injury. I don't remember much about that day. And ever since that day, I have been more tired, more headachy, and struggling more with word finding issues. The last interview that I did, I actually had to postpone it because I was struggling so much with word finding the day that it was scheduled that I couldn't do it. So, here I sit with another injury on top of my original one when I was just finally starting to get to the point where things were kind of starting to work in my brain. And now I have taken a little bit of a step backward. So I wanted to take a little bit of time today to talk about secondary injuries. I'll talk about this also if you decide to listen to the AM 950 radio, Recharging the Human Battery, you'll hear much more about this. But when I was telling my kids about it, when they were there and they saw the head injury, but I was talking about how it can cause permanent damage when you have repeat concussions, repeat head injuries. They were asking me kind of why things like that happen. And the easiest comparison that I could think of is when you bite the inside of your cheek or the side of your tongue when you're eating something. What happens to the inside of your cheek or the side of your tongue when you're eating, when you bite it? It swells, right? It swells up. It increases the chance that you'll bite it again. And that's what happens when you have a significant head injury that leaves you with symptoms, that throws you off balance. It throws off your vision. It actually makes you have a higher risk of having another head injury. And, I still struggle with reading comprehension too. So reading articles is difficult for me, but I did find some little quick little one-liners about some of the studies that are out there. There is a study that was done on high school football players that found approximately 71% of athletes that had catastrophic head injuries that actually had a prior head injury in the same season. So some of that kind of gets back to there's a thing we call second impact syndrome. The CDC Heads Up Concussion Program actually has a really good set of information on this on their website that talks about this second impact syndrome. If you have, as an athlete especially, if you have a concussion, a head injury, when you're still trying to recover from a previous head injury, especially if they're very close together and they're both significant, you can have this second impact syndrome where people have permanent brain damage. It can lead to detrimental effects such as swelling on the brain, and in some cases can actually lead to brain death if it's that severe. I'm not saying that all of these cases are like that, but it's definitely a higher risk if you had a significant head injury. If you return to play while you're still recovering, while you still have symptoms, your risk of having another head injury and having permanent deficits because of it significantly goes up. There was a another study in high school athletes that looked at again these numbers. I don't necessarily know how to believe them. 13% of high school athletes had recurrent concussions. Basically, more than 1 in 10 young athletes, high school athletes that have a concussion will have another one in their high school career. I would guess that might even be higher because there was oh my gosh, there was an episode I did back in, I want to say December or January when I talked about athletes and concussion. And I talked at that point about the fact that there's still a huge stigma around head injury, and athletes tend not to want to report it. They don't want to be kept from their game. Sometimes the coaches don't want to keep the kids out of the game, so they don't diagnose it or they don't even identify that the concussion has happened. We still use terms like, oh, I just got my bell rung and whatever. You stand up straight again and you get right back out on the field. But it's those kind of things that we really need to be cautious about because it can lead to that second impact syndrome, the permanent brain injuries. So I think at this point, we can all probably agree that the numbers are underestimating the incidence of even secondary injury because the incidence of the first injury is not accurate. We're not reporting it, so it doesn't get really well diagnosed. And on that topic of diagnosis, I know it can be really, really difficult to even diagnose a concussion. So a lot of people don't think of it. A lot of people don't use the terminology. I still remember there were multiple places that I worked when we had patients come in. I was on the neurology service. Patients would come in because of a fall with a head injury and they'd have a head bleed. And the neurosurgery team was following them, and we would get consulted because there were neurological symptoms. And nowhere in the chart did it ever say concussion. So if you've fallen and hit your head and you hit it hard enough to cause a bleed, there should be an assumption that you had a concussion to some degree with that. Now, measuring the severity of concussion, that's a whole nother story. We're trying to start up a brain program at Hypercharge Clinic. And in doing so, I'm trying to find good documentation to clarify what is a mild, moderate versus a severe concussion. At what levels do we need to provide different care? And the terminology that we have, the diagnostic criteria for that mild, moderate, severe concussion is really not well delineated. So you can't really look at someone and say whether or not they had mild, moderate, severe concussion. A lot of it is based on whether or not the person had a loss of consciousness, whether or not the person had lasting symptoms, but it doesn't say how long the symptoms lasted or anything other than that. There are some questionnaires out there that can look at what you're rating your concussion severity now, and then that can be used in treatment plans and treatment care to identify how well you're improving because you can watch that number go down over time when you're getting that treatment. But there's nothing really to identify mild, moderate, severe concussion. So any kind of concussion by definition would be a traumatic brain injury. Most of them, mild concussion would be a mild traumatic brain injury, but even a severe concussion can be a mild traumatic brain injury because you didn't spend time in the ICU. You weren't intubated. You weren't in a coma. So we use these terms mild, moderate, severe kind of loosely, and I don't think they accurately depict what's going on because, again, by terms of concussion, mine was moderate concussion. By terms of traumatic brain injury, mine was considered a mild traumatic brain injury. But here I am, a year and 5 months later, I'm still not back to practicing as a nurse practitioner because I still have cognitive deficits. My reading comprehension, my visual comprehension it's just barely reaching normal levels at this point when that's not my norm. So it's still frustrating because I can't do the things that I used to do, but it's still considered a mild TBI for whatever that's worth. It is not a comforting term by any means when you try to think about that severity and where people are at, because again, mild TBI is anything that didn't really need ICU care, and that's That's a huge amount of people who are walking around with limitations that they don't know is related to their concussion. I talked to somebody else recently this week that has been having headaches on a regular basis. Their last concussion that they were aware of was like 15 years ago, and they didn't understand that you could still have symptoms 15 years later from a concussion. And I think there's so much education that needs to be done in the community, in society, and that's my next mission is to improve that quite a bit. So much more to come on all of that. But I did want to touch on that secondary injury topic today a little bit. There were a couple other questions that I had come through that I thought I might cover a little bit more today. I have, if I can ever like track my husband down and nail him to the seat next to me, we're gonna do another updated episode with him on here as well, so that we can talk about where we're at with our relationship status, how this concussion has affected us a year and 5 months now, past the time of the accident, and how life is going, because I've had some questions on getting some updates on how we're doing from that perspective. I had a question of whether or not I'm back to work as a nurse practitioner, and I am not. And in fact, I did have a day where I tried shadowing back at my old job, and it was not something that was a success for me. So it went better than I thought it was going to go, but it made it clear that I am not ready to go back to that role anytime in the near future, unfortunately. So at this time, I am no longer an employee of that company. They're still a fabulous company. They've got great providers, great administration. We closed on good terms. At some point, maybe if my brain ever gets back fully on track, that might be an option. But at this point, I am still working, unfortunately, very part-time at Hypercharge, trying to increase my responsibilities there, increase my time limits, but I still hit my wall a year and 5 months in, and I can't say that number enough. A year and 5 months, here we are, and I still hit my wall, and I still have a lot of hypersensitivities, and I still feel on a day-to-day basis that I'm failing in so many capacities. And I know that that resonates with so many people who also have TBI and are in that same boat. There are some days that I feel like I'm on cloud nine and I can do something that I couldn't before, and I can identify it, and that's really exciting. But those days that everything just kind of reminds me that I'm not there yet, again, those are tough days. Those are really tough days. So, um, then there's that big G word that we need to talk about, grief, because I've been asked about that too. How am I dealing with the grief of losing that job, losing my identity in that aspect? And I can tell you that after being in healthcare for 25 years now, thir no, 12 years as a nurse practitioner. 2012, I graduated, we're in 2024. 12 years as a nurse practitioner. I never thought that I would get to the point where I could not do my job, because I worked so hard to get to this point. I worked so hard to get to the job where I was. And there is a lot of grief involved when you lose that part of yourself that I didn't realize how much I identified with my NP title until I haven't been able to use it. And it feels like a part of me is gone. And I know I talk about this in the book too, so this will be a little teaser for that. But I feel like that, like a part of me is gone and is missing, and it's been really hard to reconcile that. So that's a thing. That struggle is very real on that. And I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer on this, but just wanted to give an update on that sake and say that, yeah, grief sucks in any sense of the word. And I lost a very dear aunt recently, and going through grief when you're already going through grief is a whole nother, it's a whole nother ball game that I really wish I was not recruited into, because that's not a fun thing to do. Um, Questions and comments, and I might kind of bring this up with my husband's episode again too, but questions and comments that you may have received from others. At this point, I've had people asking me, well, why aren't you back at work? And you look fine, so why aren't you back at work? And sure, I look fine, but brain injury is an invisible disability. People don't see it. It's not something physical that you can see unless you watch me to the point where you can see that my exercise tolerance and my activity tolerance has significantly reduced, or you catch me at a moment where my balance is off and I just about tip over because I still can't always stand up straight, especially when I'm tired, especially if I'm hot, dehydrated. I can't tolerate temperature differences very well, so that hits me harder. But if you don't see me at one of those moments, you might not think that I have a disability. That said, I on my last testing with occupational therapy and speech therapy, my um, visual, my audit, no, my ability to name objects was on the 26th percentile, which means 74% of the people doing the testing did better than me. So being able to identify something that I'm looking at and naming objects is not fantastic. So if I were to have to go into a patient's room and part of doing a neurological exam is holding up objects and having the patient identify those objects. If I can't even identify those, it's going to be really hard to try to ask my patients to identify them. And my reading comprehension is in the 31st percentile. Again, what is that, 59%? 69% of people, something like that. Way more people still do a better job on that test than I do. And it's still on the very low side of really kind of functioning. So that's why I'm not back to being a nurse practitioner yet, because I can't comprehend those types of things. And I still don't remember medical terminology that I have known for 20, well, we'll say 24 years because this last year doesn't count. But since 1999, I learned these things. I've taught these things. I've taught nursing school. I wrote a book on migraines, and I can't tell you the things that are in there. And as I was reading my book for the Audible version of it, my Welcome Back book, I was reading it out loud. I'm like, huh, I don't remember that happening. I don't remember writing that. I'm so glad that I took notes along the way because I don't remember the things that are in that book. So trying to be able to remember to do the things that I need to do to take care of patients, that's what's holding me back. So it is very much an invisible disability, and it's eye-opening in that irony there, eye-opening in an invisible disability to identify the things that you can't do and the things that are keeping you from doing the things that you want to do. So again, there's that. Um, there are a lot of questions that came through that really will be more so for my conversation with my husband. So tune in next week when I will have him back, because my goal is to nail him down this weekend so we can get that next episode recorded. So next week we can have that conversation for you to listen to about where we're at, the updates from our family, how all of this is impacting our relationship, our family, all of the things that have been impacted because I've still been disabled for a year and 5 months. So that's what I have for you today, guys. If you have other questions, comments, concerns, things that you would like to ask me about, send those comments to me. I would love to hear them. I would love to address any questions that you guys might have. Maybe I'll do an Ask Me Anything episode coming up again. I did that a while ago. And I think it might be time to do that again too. So last little shameless plug before we wrap up here. I'll show it for those that are watching a video. The book, Welcome Back, a TBI recovery story from provider to patient, from yours truly, Mandi Dickey, NP. because I still own those initials. I will still write them at least. And yeah, it is available, as I mentioned, on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. Ingram Spark for anybody that might be a wholesaler. If you have a recommendation on where I might want to do a book signing or a local library that you would like me to donate a copy to so that it is there, let me know and I'll be glad to get those things done as well. Until next time, have a great day, you guys. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this with others to help me continue on with my mission to help people live healthier, happier lives. Go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to see what I'm up to and get links to all the social medias there. See you next time.